My name is Erin, and I am fairly new at sharing videos on this platform, so bear with me. My setup here today is the window, so some natural light, and my phone propped on top of my laptop. And it's supported in the back by my paper towel roll. So yeah, this might be a little rocky, but we're gonna go with it because I have something important to say. So back in November, I was watching a video on Instagram Live of Heather Avis, who is a well-known person in the Down syndrome community. She's written several best-selling books and has 2 adopted children with Down syndrome. So she's very well-known and very respected and wise in regard to things of disability and adoption. So I respect her greatly, and I really appreciated what she had to say in this live video because she shared so much about friendships and how friendships were affecting her daughter in middle school. And I wanted to chime in on that because I have an additional perspective to add to what she said as a person who is not so long ago in high school herself, whose brother who has Down syndrome is not in high school so long ago himself. He's 23 now, I'm 29. So for me, it's been about 10 years since I was in high school, and for my brother, it's been even less than that. So so many relevant experiences and things that I really wanted to piggyback on her thoughts and share with you all because it's so important. Friendships are so important, and the disabled community, specifically the intellectually disabled community, is unfairly represented in regard to friendships. They don't have friendships. And I'm so curious as to why that is, and I have some thoughts that I want to share. And of course, people can add kind of their own comments to speculate maybe why that is and what we can do better so that we can see more people with intellectual disabilities have true and genuine friendships, because it is so, so important. So when Heather shared in her live, she shared about how her daughter is included in middle school, but not really included. So she shared how her daughter's given high fives, and she's like, well, high fives are fine. High fives are nice, but are high fives really the best that we can do? Are high fives it for my daughter? Is that it? That all we've got for her? Because she deserves more than a high five. She deserves more than a few people who know her name but don't know her. And she said also how when her daughter was younger, especially when they're elementary age kiddos, it's easier to kind of set up mom play dates to do a lot of the work. So Heather said that she did a lot of the work. She put her best foot forward for her daughter and for herself so that she could help her daughter form these friendships, and hopeful that they would last longer, that they wouldn't just be like a one-time birthday party that was done so extravagantly, so that she could show these kids who didn't already maybe know on their own that her daughter was worthy of friendships and that her daughter was cool and fun to hang out with. As kids get older, it's hard not, it becomes more imperative to not overstep all the while. You may still, as a parent or a sibling, be disappointed that there aren't students who go out of their way naturally to even see if that person with a disability is worth hanging out with, would be a fun person to hang out with. They're not given a chance much of the time. So I went to a public high school. My brother went to the same public high school that I did. This is a big public high school. I'm talking like graduated with a class of like 800 plus students. So really big, pretty well known in the area for having a really strong special education program. However, inclusion at that time was not really the emphasis. It's fairly new in all schools that inclusion is something that schools are pushing for. Inclusion was not a word that was used half as much as it is now. Now that's what parents are looking for. That's what teachers talk about. That's what people want, inclusion, generally. Private schools even more so, I would say, than public schools, simply because of the number of students enrolled in public schools. Inclusion requires a lot more to make it happen. And so I think it's just fairly new all across the board that this is becoming like the push and the thing that a lot of parents want. And it's fair for them to want that because inclusion is what's best for a lot of students. Not everyone, but for a lot of students, it is what is best. And so this is a fairly new emphasis that we have, and so we're starting to see what is true inclusion and trying to figure that out as a community. My brother was in his own categorical classroom for the whole time that he was in school. So starting off from when he was in like pre-K and kindergarten, he was in a separate classroom, a categorical classroom. This basically means, if you're not familiar with the term, that he was in a classroom with other students with disabilities, with a teacher and an aide or 2 or 3, depending on the needs of the class. And the class is usually pretty small, like 5 students. So like for most typical elementary students, you're in a classroom of like 20 to 30 kids. At least that's what it was in my case. My brother's in classrooms of like 5 or 6 for his whole time in school up until high school. So he's already starting off his whole schooling in a separate classroom, in a kind of secret classroom, right? Like, so again, I'm speaking from my experience and his experience. So this was not super recent. I mean, this was like 10 to 20 years ago when I'm talking about like my time in elementary school, my brother's time in elementary school. So things have changed somewhat and hopefully will continue to change. They may not have in every single school or every single instance, but for the most part, things are moving in a better direction. But what I want to get into is how setting him up in a non-inclusive classroom, in a non-inclusive school, right from the get-go, kind of started him off at a disadvantage, started him off without the same opportunities as a student would have if they were included right from the start of their educational journey. So the thing about categorical classrooms, at least the thing that was true about categorical classrooms, is students were very separated. So it wasn't like, oh, this is just like the neighboring classroom and we like hang out together and we do like activities together from like a third grade classroom and this special education classroom. No, typically, at least in my school, it was like in a separate wing of the building, there were all the special ed classes. So for the different age groups or the different like severities. So that has obviously changed. But at the time, that's what it looked like. So there was like a severely disabled class. There was a mildly disabled class. Whew, okay, lots has changed since then. But I still have seen that in class or in schools, when there are categorical classrooms that are used, it's typically not like, hey, like let's stick you right in between these two other elementary classes so we can make sure all of our students are integrated and living and experiencing school together at an equal level. It's usually not that way. Usually it's that special education class is still somewhat hidden in the school, separated because, you know, loud noises or behaviors or could disturb the other classes, and we want to have the third grade classes next to each other, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to put the special education class right in the middle. Whatever the reason is, typically it's not inclusive. And that's just the model, right? Like a categorical classroom is a separate classroom. And the purpose of it is so that those students can learn together with peers who are at their same level, who may also have behavioral needs or social needs or emotional needs that are beyond what a classroom teacher could do with their background in education. So there are reasons for it. It is best for some students, but I do think that for most, inclusion is a better option, especially at the elementary age, because like I said, it sets that student up for a more successful future when it comes to friendships and socialization. You don't interact a whole lot with these special classrooms. I remember that when I was in elementary school, I did because I knew what those classrooms were, because my brother was in one of those classrooms at a different building. So I went out of my way to see if I could help out in some of those classrooms. That was odd. Other students didn't do that. I was in the minority, and the only reason I did is because I had a reason to. I wasn't afraid of doing so because I was familiar with disability, because I had disability in my family. I understand though that people don't want to engage, or they're a little bit scared of it because they don't have those experiences. So I don't blame them, but that is where it's coming from, right? So like parents are not introducing disability to their kids. So kids are walking into elementary buildings and middle school buildings and high school buildings afraid of what they don't know, right? We tend to fear what we don't know. And if we don't know disability, then we tend to be fearful of it. It's not a judgment. It's just the way things kind of are. And so how do we shift that? That is the question. So kids, they're not experiencing disability in any form. When I was a kid, the only way that I was experiencing disability is through my own lived experiences having a brother with a disability. Otherwise, there were no characters in movies, in TV shows, in books, nothing. It was almost like a secret, like it was something that people did not talk about. And there were no introductions that were made to the students in the special education classroom. That was all hush hush. Teachers didn't go out of their way to be like, hey, let's go meet these friends that are in the classroom down the hall. Let's find out who they are. Let's find out some things about them. We didn't do that. It wasn't something that we did. So all I knew was from having a brother with a disability, and most kids didn't have that. So everything was a mystery to them, and probably still is somewhat today, although we have made strides in welcoming children's books and other books and TV shows that represent characters with disabilities, and we've come a long way in that and have a long way to continue to go. So it's fair enough that it makes that the fearful nature of disability from a young age is what makes it difficult for kids to engage. And kids get older and they enter middle school and they enter high school, and now friendships are the absolute most important thing for kids. I mean, they're important in elementary school as well, but once you get into middle school, it's like something shifts and it becomes, I need to be accepted. I need to fit in. I need to have friends. I need to have a group of friends. And I don't want to do anything that's not going to get me that. Again, not a judgment, just the way it is. I was the same way. Everyone I know is the same way. Friends were the most important. So of course, you're not going to gravitate at that time toward making a friendship with a student with a disability who may have been in the same school, or even in some cases, maybe now today, the same class, who may have been in the same building, their whole elementary education. You're not going to find the time to be all of a sudden in middle school, be like, let's be friends, even though like we had this whole time to also be friends. And now it's just not going to happen in middle school. Like if you weren't already friends with that person who you didn't, you know what I mean? Like it's just unlikely to happen, especially when that student had been kind of kept as a secret or in a secret classroom all of those years. The first time you're going to initiate conversation is most likely not going to be when you're in middle school or high school. Yeah. That's not going to be the inclination for most students to suddenly engage with a student or a person with a disability. At the time of peer acceptance being like of the utmost importance, you don't really want to be different. So you're certainly not going to go out of your way to engage with someone who is known as being different. It's a shame really, but it's kind of the reality that we are living in as a society. And so I think to change this, it starts with education. And I don't necessarily mean education in the school setting, that is a big part of it, but I also mean education at home, parents and teachers calling on you to give your students, give your children opportunities to interact and engage with peers and with others who have disabilities. Before those same students become the school mascot or the school service project, which is kind of what Heather Avis, as I get back to what she was saying, what her daughter is almost like in the school day, like given high fives and given hugs, and people are friendly, but that is not the same thing as being a friend. And a lot of teachers and parents will see those friendly gestures, like those high fives and things, and be like, oh, my class is so fantastic. Look at them interacting with this student. Or like my kid talks about that kid in the special class like all the time. So they're inclusive, like they're friends. No, they're not friends. They're friendly, and that's great, and that's beautiful too. But it's not the same thing as having a true, genuine friendship with a person with a disability. That's a whole nother level. And that's what these parents, and that's what these siblings, and that's what these people with disabilities want. They want a true, genuine friendship. They don't want high fives. They don't want hugs. It's better than nothing, but it's certainly not the same thing as having a true, genuine friend. And we see this often. We see these one-time things. We hear about the one-time things in the news. We see those videos going viral on social media where the kid with a disability is voted prom king or queen. And you know what I'm talking about. Like, this is not like shocking, because I've seen a number of these over the years, multiple videos or like news articles of like this blah, blah, blah high school voted the kid with Down syndrome the prom king. That's lovely and valiant. And I'm sure it was a beautiful moment. I'm sure it meant a lot to that student, regardless of what the intention was behind it. But it shouldn't be special and unique. As much as it is now, it shouldn't be. It should just be normal. It should just be regular. He should just be voted the prom king because he was the most loved and, I don't know, best fit for the honor, for the crown. That's why he should be voted in as prom king or prom queen. Not because he has Down syndrome, not because he's the school mascot, not because it makes you feel good about yourself to be able to vote him in and get your like check mark for your good service, or your righteous act for the day, for the year, for whatever, for your lifetime, who knows. It shouldn't be for that reason at all. And even watching those videos, it makes us feel good and feels like as a society we're moving in the right direction because we did this good thing for this person who, you know, we feel sorry for because he doesn't have a lot of friends and we voted him prom king. Now suddenly it seems like he does have a lot of friends, but nothing has changed. The reason that things like this go viral and that we see this as a grand gesture and an amazing thing is because it makes us feel good. It makes us feel good that we, whether individually or as a school or as a society, are doing right by the disabled community. We can pat ourselves on the back and give ourselves a little check off on our good deeds for the year or the week or the day and feel like we did something good and that we did something right. But that's not why people with disabilities exist. They don't exist for our own benefit. They don't exist so that we can feel better about ourselves or that we can feel like we did something good by them or that we can feel like they now are not like so sad because they can't be sad. Now they were voted prom king or queen. Who cares if they don't have any friends because they were voted prom king or queen? No, like, no. And it does matter that those things happen and that the prom king is happy at the end of the day. Like, that does matter, yes. And if it's a true and genuine thing, which I'm sure is the case in a lot of these instances, then that's great. But based on the number of times that I see this happening, and even like similar things that happened when I was in high school, I question if it's truly genuine or if it's just seizing an opportunity to look a certain way, to look like a super welcoming or inclusive individual or a super welcoming, inclusive school, to look like, oh wow, the whole student body loves this kid. And maybe they do, or maybe they just love him or her from a distance. And I am most likely coming from a cynical perspective, but I have a reason to be cynical because I never saw this with my brother. After all of these years of life lived, having a sibling with Down syndrome, I have never seen a genuine friendship enter his life. There have been kids who have come into his life because they were part of Best Buddies, which ideally the vision of the organization is to create those genuine lifelong or at least school-long friendships between a person with a disability and a person without. But the only time that these friends engaged with my brother was when they had to attend like the structured, organized events that the club put on, or the occasional like once a month time where they had to do an outing together. So the student with a disability and the student without would go like plan something and then they'd go do it together. And it was like a requirement for the club. So those are the only times that my brother, and sometimes those didn't even happen, to be honest, had a friend to hang out with outside of the school day. And Best Buddies was already taking this, like, so public high school, whatever, you narrow it down to like the group of Best Buddies, and that was like a small portion of the whole high school, very small portion. Well, even that small grouping of students, they couldn't manage a more consistent friendship beyond hanging out once a month at an organized event because they had to for the club. So that's my brother, right? That's something I noticed about his own school experience. But when I was in high school too, I want to share something that came up for me when I was a student. I was a sophomore in high school, and you might be thinking when you hear this story, okay, like cool, good for her. Or on the flip side, you could be like, oh, what a saint, like she's so great, like I could never do that. Neither of those things are what I'm going for here, and that's not why I'm sharing this or what you should think, because it's not true. When I was a sophomore in high school, I had more confidence than my freshman year, of course. I don't think I would ever have done something like this my freshman year. But there was a girl with Down syndrome who at the end of the school day, the bell would ring and we would walk past each other, crowd of students, right, going one way and another way. And like we would pass each other almost every day after school when the bell rang. And I thought to myself when I first saw her, I was like, oh yeah, she has Down syndrome. My brother has that. Casual, right? Thought that crossed my mind. Passed her for weeks and weeks and kept feeling like I was supposed to say hi. So one day I did. One day I said hi. And I didn't see this as being a really big and bold thing because I was familiar with Down syndrome. Like I recognized that she had Down syndrome and I knew that that's what my brother had. So it didn't feel like, remember when I talked about it being, if something is unknown, it could elicit fear, right? Down syndrome was not unknown to me. Obviously I didn't know this girl. She was new to me, but Down syndrome was not. So it felt about as comfortable as any initiating a conversation with another person would feel, right? Like it's a little uncomfortable and a little awkward, and like you can be a little nervous about talking to anyone new that you've never talked to before. But the fact that she had Down syndrome did not make that any more nerve-wracking for me than if she didn't. So I went up to her and I was still kind of nervous because this didn't happen. Like people without disabilities, they really didn't interact. And it wasn't like you couldn't, but it just felt a little awkward because most of the time the people with disabilities, you didn't see them. You didn't cross paths with them much during the day. And when you did, when it was during the school day, they typically had like their aide with them. At least in my public high school, again, I said it was super big. Most of the students with disabilities had like an aide or a paraprofessional with them at all times. So it wasn't like something kids did to like go up and initiate conversation with the kids, whether they noticed passing them in the hallways or not. It didn't happen. They were not talked to or engaged with outside of like a forced inclusion type of experience or a teacher monitored scenario. And there was fear that was there for a lot of students. So I don't blame them for not interacting and engaging, because what if that student couldn't talk back? What if that student had a behavioral outburst or something that happened because they didn't want to be talked to and you talked to them? These are things that students think because they just don't know, right? We fear what we do not know. And I didn't know too, like, what if she doesn't speak as clearly as my brother? Or like, what if she just doesn't think I am cool and want to talk to me? I don't know. Those are like regular thoughts that cross my mind. And again, I was in high school. So even more like of a level of immaturity than I would have now to be able to look back on that experience. So that was a fear in part, and I had worries about it too. But again, because this girl's diagnosis with Down syndrome, I didn't have as much fear around maybe interacting with a student who had a different diagnosis that I didn't have as much knowledge around or wasn't as familiar with. And all I knew was that she had Down syndrome, and I passed her every day at school. So I went up to her and I said hi. And I will never forget the look on her face and her reaction. So I said hi, looked her dead in the eyes, and she immediately turns around, looks over her shoulder, looks back at me and goes, "Me?" Points to herself. "Me?" I'm like, "Yeah, you. Yeah." This had never happened to her before. She had never been engaged with, like, because she didn't think I was talking to her. She thought I was talking to literally anyone else in that busy hallway. Like, no one had ever talked to her before that didn't have a disability or that wasn't a teacher at school. Insane to me. It blows my mind and breaks my heart in all. Oh, yes. But we talked, she wrote her number down, I wrote my number down, we both exchanged names, we talked quickly in the hallway, end of the day, had to hustle out for her bus and my practice after school, whatever. We formed a friendship. I ended up going to one of her like plays or musicals that she had. After calling her mom, her number that she gave me was her mom's number, talking to her mom and coordinating with her, which is different than what you would have to do with most friends. But I did it because I was like, she's cool. Like I don't know, I didn't see it as like this thing that was like, ooh, that makes me too uncomfortable, so I'm not going to do it. I was like, oh, she clearly doesn't have friends because of the way she responded to me. So I'm going to be your friend, and not for like a pity on her kind of thing, but because like, I don't understand why she doesn't have friends, and she seems cool to me. So I want to hang out with her. I don't know why that doesn't happen more, to be honest, because my brother's cool too. Nobody hangs out with him, but they should because he's cool. So I went to like one of her plays or musicals. That was one of the first times we hung out, and a lot of the coordinating for our future hangouts was done between me and her mom, which was again something that was kind of new for friendships. I didn't usually coordinate with my high school friends, hang out with them through their mother, but it's what had to happen here. So this opportunity going to her musical was a big open door for me because this was the first time that I was able to meet some of these other friends who also went to my high school, who I had never crossed paths with, wouldn't have even known that they went to our school, who also had Down syndrome because the play or musical, whatever, was like put on by a Down syndrome organization in our area. So it was like this really, really cool group of students, friends, peers, whatever you want to call them, that I got to know some of, and then got to see those students during my school day. That it's like, you know how you don't really pay attention to things until you have a reason to, right? So like you are looking for a certain breed of dog or a new car, and then all of a sudden all you see, there's like a name for this, I think, all you see is that like type of car or that breed of dog because it's like right in the forefront of your mind. So suddenly I was seeing these friends, these peers that had Down syndrome as well, just like in random places in the building that I wouldn't have even known if I hadn't had that like kind of filter on me to look for them, because now I knew who they were because I had this friend that invited me to her play, and now I got to meet all these other friends, and it was just really great. And so this friend that I initially introduced myself to and we got to know each other, we hung out for all 4 years of high school, the 3 remaining years of high school into college. Like I'd come home from breaks and we would hang out. We'd go to the movies together. We'd go just like to a coffee shop and get a drink. It was a friendship. Is that crazy? Like, I don't know. Maybe it's crazy, but it was great. And it never felt forced. It wasn't coerced by any parent, by a teacher. It was honestly just a genuine friendship. And we did get disconnected several years into college because at that point I was engaged maybe, then I got married and was living in Michigan at that point. And then, you know, the natural thing that happens with a lot of friendships is you just kind of drift apart. So that did happen. And again, I don't share this so you can pat me on the back. This is what I did with my other friends. No one pats me on the back for hanging out with my friends. You shouldn't. There's no reason to do that. I just don't see why it has to be this extraordinary thing. but because it doesn't happen, it is seen as an extraordinary thing. It's a little backwards, right? And I bring it up because starting this friendship was so important to her, and it was equally as important to me. It was equally as valuable to both of us. It was not a one-way street. It was not me doing her a favor. It was not me being a good person. And it was none of that. It was just a genuine mutual friendship. So, I don't know, do it. Do that too. And yeah, there were times like as a high school student where I had to step into some fairly uncomfortable situations as a friend that I wouldn't have had to do in a typical friendship for like one of my high school friends, another high school friend who didn't have a disability, right? Like I would never have to like step in and correct them. But if I had needed to, I would have, because sometimes that's what friends do. Sometimes friends go into the uncomfortable places, they call you out, they help steer you the right way because they have your best interests in mind. And so this friend of mine, sometimes she would do things that were not behaviorally acceptable or were a little bit less than appropriate. And she didn't know that because of her intellectual capability. She couldn't put those pieces together, but I could. And so being her friend, sometimes I had to play the bad guy. And that was uncomfortable, I'll be honest. It did take a lot of me talking to her mom, talking to my own mom, and gathering advice from the people who'd had more experience, who were in those more mentoring roles than myself as her peer and her equal. But being in more social situations with her than her mom or my mom, I would had to be the one who would play into that role and be the person that would be like, like they don't actually find that funny. Maybe we should do something else instead. So one thing about this friend of mine was that she was so socially motivated, but not necessarily socially appropriate. That means that she wanted to fit in desperately. And then she also saw that she didn't. But she didn't understand why. Why didn't she fit in? There was that disconnect for her. So she thought like dancing and flirting was cool, and that's what the people wanted. Got to give the people what they want, because what she wanted more than anything was friends. And I was the only friend outside of her group of others with Down syndrome that she could hang out with, that she did hang out, but she wanted more than me. Whatever, like that's fine. And so because it's what she saw people dancing and she saw people being flirty on TV and other students in the hallways, and she was so perceptive, again, so socially aware and motivated about what others were doing. And she was like, well, this is what I see other people doing, and this is how they get a reaction that seems positive, so that's what I'm going to do too. And so she would see that and think that people would want to be her girlfriend, to be her friend, but that's not what those people, those students, those peers were thinking, unfortunately. A lot of times what would happen is that people were thinking, oh, she's odd, or this is making me uncomfortable, or this is really funny. But instead of saying that out loud, they were laughing, or they were cheering, or they were encouraging her, they were egging her on, they were not being friendly. They weren't being friends or friendly, to be honest. They're saying, do it again, like, but as soon as that situation ends and she leaves, they're gonna turn and whisper to their buddies and talk about that and not be kind. And I know that because I saw that. And that what they're thinking in their head is not kind. On the other hand, I would also see, so people would either be like, oh, do it again, kind of provoking the inappropriate behaviors. Or I would see the opposite, or not the opposite, but another side of the coin would be like, oh my gosh, you're so cute, you're so sweet, like you're so funny. And this would typically be the female students that were encouraging in a different way. Like they were just infantilizing this peer who in a lot of cases is either the same age or older than these younger high school students or middle school students, and they would turn them into like this object that they could infantilize and be like, you're so sweet, so precious, like this peer student, this high school student is a puppy or a kitten who's like just you're lavishing with love and affection and whatever. Do you do that to your other friends? Because if you do, like, all right, that's just who you are, I suppose. But I very rarely would see that as a thing that would happen until the student had disability. Like I saw students with disabilities in high school be like pet like an animal, or like disproportionately treated as less than human. And you can easily do that by saying things that seem kind, like, you're so sweet, you're so cute, like those things are kind, but the way you say it communicates something entirely different and is hardly ever genuine. To me, it's so obviously fake. I can spot it from a mile away. And secondly, being a friend or even being friendly it's not helpful in this case, like in a case where a student or a peer is being inappropriate, because you're not helping her. You're not helping him be a better person. You don't have their best interest in mind because they exist for you at that point to fill something that you are missing in your own day or your life or whatever it is. It's not right. There's a difference between laughing at and laughing with. And a lot of times what I saw in my own education and with my brother too, because he's a funny guy, is people would laugh at. They weren't laughing with, they were laughing at. And that's heartbreaking to me. And I have the familiarity with it. I can spot it from a mile away. A lot of people don't know that there's a difference. They're like, oh, we're having fun together. We're just bros. We're having fun. Think about why you're laughing, and think about if that person is existing for your entertainment or for your value, getting something out of them instead of as something you're enjoying together as friends, which doesn't often look like a public scene. In this case, a genuine friend steers her away. A genuine friend does not say like, okay, you're existing right now to make me laugh, and what you're doing, even though I know is incredibly inappropriate and actually not funny, is making me laugh. So I'm going to sit here and continue to provoke you to do it because it benefits me. What a true friend does in this instance is says, hey, you are so good at that, but I actually don't know that people are like really liking it, or it's not really like the time or place for that, but I would love to get to know you if you want to come sit at our lunch table. I didn't see that. And I still, as a former teacher, I didn't see that either. I didn't see that from students. And it's hard to be that person, right? It's hard to step into situations where you suddenly have to be kind of the adult when you're not an adult. It's uncomfortable sometimes. But that's what it takes to be a true friend sometimes. And you would do it for your other friends, I would think. So why would you not do it for somebody with a disability who is also looking for friendship so desperately? And these adolescents, they turn into adults. And friendships are hard enough to keep as adults as it is. So imagine how lonely it must be to be a person with a disability who didn't have friends and still doesn't. Imagine that for a second. We all want friendship, and a lot of us have friendships. People with intellectual disabilities are at a disproportionate level of friendships. They just don't have friendships. From my experience in my years in high school and my brother's years in high school, it wasn't a thing. Those friendships were either forced, through clubs, even with the best intentions in mind, or parents who were like, you know what, you really need to be friends with that kid because they need a friend. That's forced, even if it benefits both parties in the end. Like initially, right, it was forced, and sometimes that's what it takes. I'm not saying that shouldn't exist at all, because sometimes it takes to form a genuine friendship. Then there needs to be some like, hey, we're gonna do this. We're gonna do this even if it's hard. But sometimes those friendships are also fake, right? Because the students used the student with a disability to achieve their own blank, or to get their own blank, whether that's laughter or their own like bonus points for feeling like a good human, their own sake, whatever it is. There's so many reasons why people enter into friendships without genuine intentions, and I don't know. I just feel like we can do better, and we should do better. And this was my experience. This was my brother's experience. Clearly, this is the experience of many other individuals with disabilities, as Heather had shared about her daughter, this being 10 years since I was in high school, and these things are still happening where we're seeing our friends with a disability as not fully human, as the means to an end, as the means to get your laughter, means to feel like a good person, the means of you fill in the blank with whatever that might be for you. But we can do better, and we should do better, because people with disabilities, not only do they deserve friends, but they are good friends. The friend that I made in high school was a good friend. She was fun. She was funny. Like, we had fun together. And being a friend is always worth it. It's always worth it. The ways that you can bless another, and the ways that you can in turn receive blessing from another person, it's always worth it. So, yeah.